All right, so I think I'm going to tackle the intake oil leaks. So that was in the front and back of the intake. Like I said, I don't think I got enough RTV in there. You know, seems to be, it's the biggest pain in the ass, I think, really, is I'm just gonna have to drain the coolant, and I'm gonna drain the oil anyways, because this is the break-in oil, and I think I've got it through the break-in period. It wasn't leaking bad enough that I was worried about, you know, driving it, so I did drive it a bit to get a little break-in. So I'm gonna go ahead and get it up a little bit, get underneath, drain the coolant, and then from there I'm going to start pulling things apart so that I can get that intake off. A couple of cool things on this EFI. Sorry, I had to move a bucket here. So instead of having to disconnect each of my individual plugs and everything, we have this subsection connector, and there's another one down there, and I can just disconnect those, leave everything connected on the intake itself, and just pull it off that way. I don't think the distributor will be in the way. I mean, it'll be in the way, but not to the point where I'm worried about I have to take it off or anything. So worst case, I have to, you know, remove the cap or something. So I think I'll be okay there. So pretty much just disconnect those two connectors back there, get the coolant and oil drained, take the bolts out, and then I should be able to lift it off there, clean up the gaskets, and then put the new gaskets on and put a good thick slathering of RTV on the front and back, and put it back together and hope that I did it right this time. All right, step one, get your car up off the ground. So I got both the front and back up off the ground. Because one of the things I forgot to mention, since we're gonna have to pull this off, we're gonna pull the fuel rail off of here, or the fuel line off the fuel rail there. So since I'm doing that, I have a fuel leak in the back, the pressure will be released. So it might be a good time to go ahead and work on that as well. Okay, so my one and only complaint about the Champion radiator is that the drain petcock is right here, which lands right on this cross member, so is pretty much useless. If I open that thing up, it goes all over, makes a big freaking mess. So I'm gonna drain it right there at the lower radiator hose. And it'll drain faster anyways, so I'm gonna do that right now. And of course, doing that, I still made a big ass mess. That's the way it goes. Okay, one thing I did forget to mention is we need to pull these battery terminals off, because we're gonna be messing with the EFI, so I don't want any power going to it. This guy, I loosened it and it does not want to come off, so I'm gonna tap it with something here. Wiggle it back and forth. There we go. Okay, so negative battery terminal there is off. The other negative battery terminal I have on the side post here is actually going to the starter, not messing with anything down there. So I think I'm just going to leave that one for right now. So now I'm going to real quick remove the release on the distributor here, just to get it out of the way, because I'm going to remove the upper radiator hose. All right, so now I'm going to pull this first harness off. This is the coil and distributor. It's not necessarily connected, but it is in the way, so I'm going to pull that off there, and then I'm going to kind of move this out of the way this way. Oh, it is connected to this sensor back here, so I could leave it, but I'm going to go ahead and disconnect it because it's connected to the coil still, and I'm not going to disconnect that. And the other one is the main harness I'm concerned about is this guy. This is going to the injectors, so that's disconnected now. So I pull that out of the way, and that should come off with the whole unit, no problem. So that's part of that. I don't have to take off my zip ties, I'm all right there. I do have to pull the oil temp or the oil pressure out of there because it is part of it, or I can just cut the zip tie, I guess, because it's just zip tied in with those. I think I'm gonna pull it because that way I don't have to cut the zip ties and I can reuse them. All right, and so this is the worst part. There's not really any place to like relieve the pressure off the system for the fuel. I haven't ran it in quite a few days, so I'm hoping that there's not a whole lot of pressure built up in there. I'm gonna go ahead and release that AN fitting right here, and I'm gonna try and I have a little cup over here that maybe I can catch some of this fuel as it comes out. We'll see how that goes. First, I'm gonna loosen that up. Hopefully this doesn't make a huge mess. I hate fuel, it's a mess. It dries fast at least. That's the one thing that is nice about it, but I just don't like the smell of it. Huffing fuel is not my idea of a good time. Looks like it's pretty empty in there. That might not be as bad as I thought at all. No, not at all. Nothing came out. So my biggest fears are alleviated. All right, at this point, I think I can just take the bolts out from the manifold and pull it out of there as I knock things over behind me. I got all the wires disconnected. This is disconnected. I'm gonna have to pull this out of the way when I put it. Yeah, I might be able to get it out of the way here. We'll see. I just need it out of the way enough that I can pull that up. I don't think I'll have to take the valve covers off. We'll see when I get the bolts out. But everything is connected to that, so yeah, I think I'm ready to go. Okay, so I think I got all the bolts out. I'm just double checking. Yep, looks like it. So I'm gonna break this loose. I should be able to hopefully lift it up by something here. See how hard this is to break loose now. It's the big question. I think I might need to get a little bit of a pry bar and just kind of find something I can pry against. Okay, so it was stuck. Man, it wasn't coming off very easily. So I ended up taking this pry bar and placing it under, not the outlet, but under the actual manifold, and then using the water pump there for leverage. And I had to push on it pretty good, and it just popped. So you can see it's off there now, wiggling around. So I'm going to go ahead and try and pull this out of there. Yeah, there we go. And we're free. All right, let's do a little bit of sleuthing here to see if I can tell where I was leaking. So if you look on my bead here, looks like it flattened out a little bit here, but it looks pretty rounded there. That means that probably didn't touch very well there. So I didn't put a very good bead there. And then you can see a pretty good gap here. I don't know if that came off with the manifold or not yet. And then same thing there. You can see a bunch didn't come off. I'm thinking that's probably where it wasn't touching the manifold, and that's where it was leaking. So I got to scrape all that off. I got to scrape all these this old gaskets off now. And let's look at the manifold side. Have it up over here. So you can see some came off there, but pretty sparse there. So I definitely need to put it on thicker. Same thing here. There's a bunch of spots that are just missing. So I'm just gonna cake that on a little bit more this time. I gotta scrape off, especially around the water jackets, it looks like. Probably the same, yeah, on the other side. So I'll work on that and then get some new gaskets and put it back together. All right, got the gasket scraped off of there. Didn't figure that would make for a good YouTube video, so I didn't record any of that. But you'll see I have a bunch of rags over there, rag here. So basically what I did is I stuffed rags in, the ports to make sure nothing fell in there. Tried to pull as much solid pieces of gasket off of here as possible so that I wasn't getting little bitty pieces falling off. And then I checked thoroughly inside of here and pulled any little pieces that fell down into there, because those things can block oil passages and really screw up an engine. So just a couple of things to look out for. That's going to do it for me for tonight. I got to get some gaskets, and the parts store's closed, and so I'm going to go ahead and start back up in the morning. From now on, I'm having all my parts delivered. I'm not going to the parts store anymore. Went into AutoZone, got the gasket, and come out and find this. And no cars nearby. Guess what? No notes. People are jerks. That said, got the gasket for the intake manifold. I got this big bottle of RTV this time. Last time I tried doing it with just my regular small little bottles there, and obviously we didn't do a good job. So I'm going to go ahead and use that one to put the RTV on this time. And I got to get my gasket cinch, paint that on. If you haven't seen that, watch part 1 of installing this thing. I believe it's part 1. Installing the manifold and everything. So I'm going to do that and pop that back on, and hopefully we're in good shape. So if you did watch that part 1, you'll recall I had to trim a couple of parts off these gaskets before putting them on. First is this little guy here. It runs into a little bit on the head gasket that kind of sticks out. So I got to trim those off on each one, and then I also want to trim these off because they block the water passage. I'm not sure what their reasoning is for putting those on there, but that's how I'm gonna. That's what I did last time. Didn't have any issues with water leaking or anything like that, so I think I'm just gonna do that again. that should be good. Go ahead and place these on there. And the main thing, I just have to, I want to make sure these ports aren't blocked off at all. Before I kind of press down, I'm going to check all the ports. That's a little higher, right there, okay. Let's move it that way, get it on the screw mold. Alright. Okay, that feels pretty good. I'll grab the other one. Just a little bit. Okay. This should be good. Now, we're gonna do our RTV on the front and back. This time, thick enough. All right, let's give this thing a whirl. By this thing, I mean this gasket maker. Okay, that I think is gonna do it. Let me get a video of that. You can see how thick I laid that on there. That should be good. My biggest concern earlier, and the reason I didn't put enough on last time, was because I was afraid of it coming into the valley here. But I think we're gonna be all right because it just needs to be thick on there. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the front, and then I'll put the part on. All right, this is what we're looking at. I got the manifold on there now, and you can see I have that bead all the way under there. And I'm just trying to get one spot here that I want to see. Oh, there we go. I don't know, man. It still looks like it's not touching like I'd like. Alright, because I didn't like the way the front looked, I pulled it off there, and look at that. You see a bunch of spots that it did not completely adhere. And this is the back, even worse. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a bead on this and drop it on there that way. Hopefully that'll get it completely adhered, or we'll see. All right, I put a little bead on both the front and back there, and I add a little more to both the front and back here. So now the trick is to do all this, put that guy on there without making a big mess. Oh shit, I got it on the fucking... Look at that. Made a big mess already. Am I stuck on? Oh, this guy. Shit. Well, that was not as pretty as I would have liked it to have been. So the instructions on the gasket maker, the RTV, say to give it about an hour, you know, put the bolts in, but finger tight, and then give it about an hour before you put them to torque spec. So I'm kind of at this point just waiting to put those in. So what I'm going to do is I've already hooked up the upper radiator hoses. I'm going to hook up the lower radiator hose and finish hooking up all the wires. All right, let's talk about torquing this thing down. So I already went through and did it, but essentially the bolts are 18 foot-pounds of torque to an aluminum head. And there's some discrepancies from what I've read on the pattern. So Edelbrock says start from the inside, work your way out. I just doing Ford Performance intake, and it recommended going 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6, 7, 8, and then the insides would be 9, 10, 11, 12. Actually 9, 10, 11, and 9, 10, 11, and 12. So you need to go through those over and over again until they all reach their torque spec without turning. So I went through it probably 5 times before I got to where it needed to be. So hopefully that sets it where it needs to be. I'm pretty happy with this. I'm seeing plenty of RTV in there. Needs to set up for about 24 hours now. I already hooked up all my connections except for the fuel, so I need to hook that up still, and then get my air cleaner on, and then in the meantime, now that I got this down to torque, get those couple of things done, the fuel and the air cleaner, I'm going to go to the back and try and get the gasket fixed in the fuel tank so my fuel leak stops. So that's what I'm going to do next. Alright, so the pain in the ass part of this is done. I had to pull this fuel line off, and that was what I was really kind of dreading because, you know, fuel. So the other side was this wire. That's not a big deal. You just unhook the wire. The main thing, we're going to have to pull this ring off and the gasket that's in there because I think that gasket got pinched. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of knock this back with a screwdriver and hammer to turn it, pull everything off, and then see what that looks like, and then get the new one on. Okay, I popped the other one off there, and you can see my white greasy mess there. So basically, I've read that you can put some white lithium grease on these, and it kind of holds them in place and keeps them from falling out where they need to be. That's what I put on there. So got everything in place. I'm going to try and knock it back to knock this back on there, and then really won't know if it's working until I put some fuel in there. Alright, that's what it looks like all together. Now I won't really know until I got fuel in there to see if that works, so I'm gonna go grab some fuel. Alright, draining the break-in oil now, and just checking a couple things as you do. This is a magnetic drain plug, and I'm not seeing anything that indicates there's metal on there. That's freaking rad. I mean, it's just the biggest thing that makes me nervous, right? Is that you're gonna find a bunch of metal on there. So I'm gonna kind of dab it like this, and then take a look at the napkin, and it looks pretty good to me. I'm gonna also take a magnet here. You can see the end is clean. This I drained a little bit of the oil into there, and I'm just going to run that all the way down to the bottom there because that's where the metal would have gone. And I'm making a mess on my... And that looks clean to me. It's good news. Alright, after making a big ass mess, had to cut the oil filter open because we wanted to check it out. So the main thing when you're breaking in an engine, from what I'm hearing, is you know, open these oil filters up, and then kind of look in between the flaps of the filter here, and I'm looking in this light here, and I'm looking for anything shiny, obviously for any metal fragments. I went through and just checked it out real good earlier, and I'm just kind of going through it right now just to show you. And I didn't find anything, so that makes me really happy. I made a big mess on my workbench, but still really happy. The other thing was kind of funky. When I pulled the oil filter off, it didn't have any oil. It appeared it did not have any oil in it because I pulled it off, and then nothing came out. But when I cut this thing open, there was tons of oil in there, so it must have just, from sitting for several days, just drained out, and then stayed in the filter otherwise. So yeah, that makes me really happy. I'm gonna get some more oil and another filter and slap it all back together, and then my 24 hours will be up on the RTV, and I'm gonna fire this thing up again. The other thing I didn't mention is I put this filter mag on the oil filter. You're supposed to put 2 on there. You just kind of clamp them on around the outside. They're like super strong magnets. I ordered this, had just the one, and I thought it came as a pair. Didn't, so I was ready to fire it up, so I just went ahead and ran with one. It still would have pulled metal fragments out, because this filter is this magnet is extremely strong. All right, just did my final checks, made sure I had coolant, and I double checked the oil, make sure I put enough in there. It's been sitting for a while, so it should be settled. Looks like we're at the full line. Reattach the battery, so now I'm gonna fire it up and make sure it runs again, and check for any oil leaks up here. So I cleaned up kind of what was down here. I gotta get a little bit of that still puddled into that little spot right there, but otherwise I cleaned up all around that area. You can't see it because the engine's black, but I could see there was oil there when there was, and then I cleaned up behind it as well. So fire it up and see how that goes. Can't really check the fuel because it's raining and I don't want to go drive it in the rain, so I'll wait for that, and then I'll take it to go get some fuel at that point. So this is where I initially fired it up, and you can see the RPMs up in the top middle here, and they start surging between a little over 1,000 RPMs and a little over 2,000 RPMs. So I'm dropping into a different view here. This is where I go into the advanced tuning and then the idle tuning. The coolant temperature wasn't up to temp yet, but you can see the surging here. Was trying to figure out what was going on, and then realized I'm an idiot because I forgot to hook back up the idle air control. So you can't really set your idle without that. So that's on there now. I'm gonna put that back on and try and fire it up again. Well, I was trying to start it and it was just cranking and cranking. I thought I ran out of fuel, so I went and got some gas in it. And kind of found that it still wouldn't start, even though I primed the pump and took my time and all that. But I kind of pushed down on this. That was a little bit loose. I thought that was it. Tried again, still didn't work. I was like, well, that wasn't it. But this goes to show, when you work inside the engine, you got to just go through and double check everything, because I came over here and I found that dude disconnected. So time to hook that back up and see if it runs. So after finding all my idiotic mistakes, like forgetting the IAC connector and then finding that one plug that had fallen off, the Mustang still wouldn't start. And so I traced it back. You check air, fuel, and spark, and I didn't have spark. So I traced all that back, checked all the wires, made sure everything was, or plug wires, and made sure everything was plugged in. I took all the wires off the distributor, popped the distributor off there, the distributor cap off there, and looked in, visually inspected it. Everything looked good. Not a whole lot that could go wrong. It's a Hall sensor that could fail, I guess. So I went ahead and ran an ohm meter on my coil, and the ohm readings weren't right. So I said, all right, well, I'll just go run down. AutoZone had one of these MSD blasters, same one I had. Ran down, got it. Not AutoZone, O'Reilly's. give credit to the right people. So ran down and grabbed it and popped that in there, and now